and sit down. Thanks so much. So my name's Ros Gray. I'm the Programme Director of the MA Art and Ecology and Co-Director of the Centre for Art and Ecology at Goldsmiths. And this is the Postgraduate Art Lecture Series, and it's a particularly special session this evening because we have a double book launch of two seminal new books by Françoise Vergès. And this is part of a kind of number of lectures that I've programmed with the broad theme of climate justice, artistic research and activism. The first session was on Monday 27th of January. We had Catherine Weir talking about Himalayan water systems. Françoise's session tonight is the second of the series. And then on the 10th of March, we'll have Rada de Souza on climate crises and brain fog. So it's an absolutely huge honour to introduce tonight's conversation between Françoise Vergès, Shela, Sheikh and myself. We're launching not one but two major new books by Françoise, a programme of absolute disorder, decolonising the museum, which is published by Pluto Press, and Making the World Clean, Wasted Lives, Wasted Environment and Racial Capitalism, which is published by Goldsmiths Press as part of the Planetarities book series. And I'm going to say a couple of more words about that in a second. We do hope that after the conversation you'll stick around not only for the Q&A, but also to have a drink from the bar outside, which is actually a fundraiser for the MFA degree show, so do have a drink or two. And Françoise's books will also be available to purchase. It's really a huge honour for me personally to introduce these speakers to you, who really need no introduction, but let's do one anyway. Françoise was co-director of the Centre for Cultural Studies when I arrived at Goldsmiths as a postgraduate student some 25 years ago. I turned up with a vague sense that my very traditional Eurocentric education was woefully inadequate for understanding the contemporary world I found myself in, and Françoise opened up a whole world of new worlds, of post-colonial, anti-colonial feminist theory and practice that was historically grounded and truly transformative. And it's a pedagogy that I'm still learning from. And Shela, who of course was a treasured colleague at Goldsmiths until more recently, who's much missed by so many of us here, and still my favourite co-conspirator. It's so good to have you both here. And it feels particularly appropriate to be holding this event here in the Professor Stuart Hall building, site of last year's occupation by Goldsmiths for Palestine, to launch these two vital books. So I'll just very briefly say a little bit about the Planetarities book series. So this is a series that's commissioned for Goldsmiths Press by Jennifer Gabrys, who sadly can't be here this evening because she's unwell, myself and Shela. And this book series investigates the rise of research and practice that attends to earthly and planetary concerns, unfolding at a time of multiple environmental crises. It seeks to draw on and extend and rework Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak's notion of planetarity, taking up distinct types of planet thought, planet feeling that are emerging at this moment of planetary distress. So it's attempting to engage with multiple planetarities that materialise by undoing the abstractions of globalism and by expanding beyond the consolidations of the universal human, and by working towards new connections and collectives that are differently tied to the planet. So there are more books in the pipeline, so keep an eye out for those. I'm just going to now introduce Françoise and Shela more thoroughly. Françoise is currently Senior Fellow Researcher at the Sarah Parker Redmond Centre for the Study of Race and Racialisation, University College London. She is also the 2024-25 Bannister Fletcher Global Fellow in Urban Studies at the University of London Institute in Paris, ULIP, in the context of which she leads the Post Museums project between London and Paris. She's also co-funder of the collective Decolonize the Arts, and she organises decolonial visits to museums and ateliers, a workshop and public performance with artists and activists. Françoise has written many books and articles on the afterlives of slavery and colonisation, climate catastrophe and the racial capitalist scene, the impossible decolonisation of the Western Museum, decolonial feminism, psychiatry and the Post-Museum. And her many publications include the two books that we're launching tonight, of course, but also seminal titles such as A Decolonial Feminism, Wombs of Women, Race, Capital, Feminism, and Resolutely Black, Conversations with Françoise Vergès, amongst many others. She's also written documentary films on Maurice Condé and Aimé Césaire, and as project advisor for Documentaire 11 and the Triennial of Paris. Shela Sheikh is senior lecturer in international politics and director of research at ULIP, the University of London Institute in Paris. Prior to this, she directed the MA Postcolonial Culture and Global Policy at Goldsmiths from 2014 to 2022. She co-led the Goldsmiths Critical Ecologies research stream, and her work spans environmental humanities, post- and decolonial studies, and global arts. She recently co-directed with Malcolm Ferdinand issue 1 of the plurilingual journal Pluriverse, a journal of decolonial ecologies, which you can find at pluriverse.net. So the way that we're going to do this launch tonight is as a sort of three-way conversation. So I'll hand over to Shela to pick things up.
Can you all hear me? Yes, it seems. There's a lot of people on the stage. Should we just do a little bit of shuffling? There's spaces here at the front, and maybe everyone could just move in a bit. As Rose mentioned, I have left Goldsmiths, so it's somewhat emotional to be back, to see so many familiar faces. And I thought I'll just start with an anecdote, because the two books we're going to be giving a kind of expose of, in quite sort of broad strokes, were published quite recently. So the Désordre Absolu, or this program of absolute disorder and decolonizing the museum, was first published in 2019 in French, or was it when? Oh, you're right, oh my god. So losing track of time. Okay, very recently in French, and then even more recently in English. And the Making the World Clean has just come out just before Christmas. So what seems like quite recent work is actually, I would say, embedded in a much longer history, and we'll hear more from Françoise about this. But I just wanted to sort of situate this work and the discussion we'll be having here at Goldsmiths. We'll be hearing about France, we'll be hearing about La Réunion, about Gaza, about all kinds of places. Yet, as Rose mentioned, Françoise was teaching here, doing incredibly important work, establishing a sort of more global, decolonial perspective on cultural studies. And it was actually 2004, very long time ago, that I first came here interested in doing the MA in cultural studies and happened to speak to Françoise, who very politely says she remembers it, but maybe not. And we had a chat, and she said, okay, you're in. Oh, but you're not in on the cultural studies MA, you're in on this new MA that I've created that was the MA in post-colonial studies. So I have a lot to thank Françoise for having basically detoured my whole academic and professional life. And I just want to sort of mark the significance of that sort of trajectory and that sort of installation of teaching post-colonial studies here at Goldsmiths. I think it's worth really stressing as we sort of faced with all kinds of cuts. And it was also at that moment I gleefully came with my new pencil case and exercise books, turned up, and Françoise wasn't here because she had gone on this project, I was told by Breda, who was working in the Center for Cultural Studies. No, she's gone to La Réunion. I'm like, what? Where? Okay, and La Réunion is basically the chapter about the project that you were working on, that you'd embarked upon, that forced you to leave New Cross. And that's in the Decolonizing the Museum book. So that was just to sort of situate, this work that's quite recently published, the genesis of a lot of that was at that very important moment. But I wanted to begin by just asking you, as if people in the room haven't read the book, I'm sure many of you have, just to say a little bit about the very sort of practical work you've been doing around quote-unquote decolonizing the museum, or creating a program of absolute disorder, as you say, citing Frantz Fanon. And just to see if you could talk us through a little bit about how you came to put together the book, and in particular, through the very concrete work you were doing in Paris at the time, at the Louvre in particular.
Good evening. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for coming, and thank you for finding myself a student. Does not make me very young, very old. So, here the old lady. So yes, I mean, it's always started for me with a practice that raises questions. I'm doing something and then it's not really working, or it's working, and so I need to know more. I need to work, further. That's one thing. And then, coming from Rainier Island, and coming from that place, we do know that all revolutionary movement, feminist movement, social movement, develop counter-narrative and counter-image. It's a very important, it's absolutely central. So how do you intervene in that field? I mean, to go to the Louvre directly, it was in 2012, and there was a trial in Paris, and Aubrey Vezor was a curator, asked me, what do you want to do? And at the time, I started to work on the slavery in France. Because when I arrived in France in 1996, I realized that the French society had no clue about, the fact that their country had been a slave power, They thought that was the bad American or whatever. I was like totally scandalized and absolutely stupefied. So we started, to work on that, and in 1988 there was a huge demonstration in Paris. Only, people from the former slave society, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guyana, and Réunion, and we were 50,000 marching in the street and saying, okay, we are the descendants of enslaved, and you have to remember that history, and you have to do something about it, which led to the 2001 law that declared slave trade and slavery crime against humanity. 2004 arrived, and I said to Aubrey, I want to do decolonial visit in the Louvre. And the point was also about this question of visibility and invisibility. What is visible, what do we see, what we don't see. And for me it was interesting to go to the Louvre because the collection of the Louvre is 1793, which is the first abolition of slavery in a French colony, Saint-Domingue, which you are Egypt, and 1848, and then after you have a collection at Musée d'Orsay. It's an art history date, it has nothing to do. But for me it was perfect, that the moment, two important dates in the history, and also because it's 18th century, which is, as you do know, the absolutely, the biggest number of African deported during that age of the revolution, deported to the colony, to the European colony. So my question was, when I went to see the people in the Louvre, they told me we are not a museum of slavery. I said, well, we know that, of course. That's not the point, The point is, nonetheless, this is really the fact that the Louvre was created as a revolutionary gesture. It's the French revolutionary. We opened the Louvre, they opened the Louvre as a public. So it's the first public institution, museum public institution in the world. That's great. So, and it's created at that moment, 18th century. So my question was how the project of slavery penetrate the visual culture. So it's not about the literal representation of slavery. Let's not look for the slave with a chain. Look at when do we start to see tobacco, sugar, coffee pot, teapot, coffee, all this appearing in the painting. You don't see that in 15th century, you don't see that in 16th century, even though you start to have sugar, but it's really by the end of the 17th century, because it entered the representation. It entered the representation of the bourgeois world and tobacco, of the bourgeois man, of masculinity. And also, effectively, sugar being a very precious commodity. You have painting of aristocrat women holding just a little piece of sugar as if they are holding something very precious. So my story was, slavery, the enslaved, was not represented until the abolitionists in Britain, the British abolitionists, did the Brooks and so on, as you do. But my point was it penetrated. And so the question of visibility and invisibility, because I was told you don't see it, there is no. But yes, you do see it. So this question of what is visible and why do you need visibility of something that is nonetheless represented? And looking, for instance, at landscape of 17th century of Northeast Brazil, which was a Dutch colony at the time, and there was a very important Jan Post painter who went with the Prince of Orange and painted a landscape, beautiful, and then brought them back in Europe. And the king of the Netherlands gave some to Louis XIV. So they are now in the Louvre. And they are huge landscapes. And it's the first time that you have exotic landscape appearing in Europe. And you do have representation of plantation. But when you have the people, they just see a landscape. They see an exotic landscape. So for me, it was to show how a plantation become a decor. So it's now, and you do see black people, in that plantation, but you do see them. You don't see them because what you see is a paysage. So it was working on this question of visibility, invisibility, and that sometimes we use the term invisible. In fact, it's visible. Yeah. It's visible. It's just we have to retrain the way we see. Yeah. So that was the Louvre, but I did it also at the Museum for Napoleon. And I did it also, that was another, the non-representation of Haiti, the total erasure of Haiti for Napoleon. Yeah. So it was, but to see the Napoleon thing was interesting because they reproduced the entire, the room he was at Sainte-Hélène. It's Napoleon, so yeah. And when I visited it with the staff, the direction, I noticed there was Chinese furniture. And I said, well, do you have Chinese furniture in Napoleon room, in Sainte-Hélène? It's like not that. I had no memory of Napoleon being, so interested in Chinese furniture, when he was in France. It was all, eagles everywhere in gold. So, and they said, we don't know. So it was again, it was there. But what was interesting is like the little bed in which he died and the mean British who, but they didn't see the Chinese furniture. And I said, so I went back home and I looked, and the point was interesting with the British who brought Chinese indentured workers to Sainte-Hélène and also enslaved people from Madagascar. And because in fact Sainte-Hélène was a stopover for the plant that the British were taking in Asia and Africa. They could not take it straight to the Kew Garden, so you have to have a stopover, then where they were replanted and so on, and then they could work on. So this was, you have Chinese indentured worker and African enslaved. And so this is why you had Chinese furniture in Napoleon bedroom. But they had not seen it. They had reproduced the rule, but they had not seen it, and so they were not interested in that story of enslavement and indentured work by the British in the Eastern, India Company. And so it's the thing that they are there. It's not invisible, but we are educated in not seeing them. So how do we re-educate ourselves to see what is in fact under our eyes? And also I was quite happy to learn that Napoleon died among Chinese and black people. This racist man.
I mean, essentially what we'll be getting to in the discussion is how we can think about what you've given us in these two books in terms of practices today, how do we intervene in museum spaces or public spaces. So could you just really quickly tell us, when you say I did it, what exactly did you do with the project Decolonial or with publics in the Louvre in terms of this question of visibility, invisibility? What was the intervention into that?
I mean, the Louvre, very quickly, it was identifying the painting or, sculpture or whatever. And then it was advertised, and the public was very diverse. You had the old lady coming to the Louvre, and young men, and young students, and young women. And so there was an art historian who was telling the public what, who was a painter and when. Then I intervened to talk about, in fact, the history of sugar, the story of tobacco, or the story of cotton, or different things. And then I asked an artist to intervene. So, for instance, I asked Julien for the Medusa, the Raft of the Medusa. Maryse Condé would come also, or Marcus Rediker also came, so the historian. We had also, so the artist was free. The artist did not have to comment the painting. The artist had to talk about what, the painting, whatever triggered. So when Maryse Condé talked about cannibalism in literature, because of the Raft of Medusa. And so it was really, so the artist was doing what she or he wanted. But and the public, they asked for more. So I was able to do it legally, with the service of the Louvre, and then after the Louvre no longer wanted me to do them, and I just did them. I did not ask for permission, because after all, the Louvre, you can enter the Louvre, and so I did it for many years, and sometimes I do it also again, just with a group of people. I did it also at Branly, but Branly is much more difficult. At Musée Branly, they usually call the guard to expel you very quickly. They don't want, and so this is that. And Decolonial was, in fact, it started by the fact that there was a racist and sexist attack on a young woman, a friend of ours. We wrote a manifesto saying there is racism in the art world and cultural world, and this is totally hidden because it presents itself as progressive and left and so on. But it exists a lot, and it's not just a question of representation and things like that. So we created, we are just, a group of women. We did decolonize the art. We had a book in which we invited different profession, interventions, so performance, contemporary art, theater, different things. And we had a free university, which was open also, what they were doing, and we were talking about question of representation, question of imagination. So that was decolonize the art, and then also there was a museum in Rennes, which was an incredible experience also. Very, very, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. So constantly, l'atelier, it's constantly something.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think that it's really interesting to continue to think about this question of visibility and invisibility, because that also is so central to cleaning the world. And perhaps just say a little bit about how Shela and Jennifer and I came to commission this really powerful book. In 2019, you wrote an article in eFlux called Capitalist Scene, Race, waste, and gender. And I think one of the sort of really powerful things about that article is, you had talked about the labour of maintaining the museum, right? Whose labour in the museum is visible and whose gets invisibilised, and you've obviously worked with artists who have, addressed these things through their works as well. But what you did in that article is make a connection between the labour struggles of racialized workers who clean hotels and spas and so on, and the sort of lifestyle of cleanness, which is a kind of white cleanness that gets maintained and requires a huge amount of labour that is also invisibilised. So there's sort of, in a way, this connection between, that's kind of, I think that what was so powerful in the intervention of this article is really how you made that connection clear. In order to maintain white cleanness, this ideal of cleanliness, and this sort of racialized ideal, it requires a huge amount of work by often women who are racialized. And so I think it would be really interesting to hear you talk about perhaps the sort of continuities between these books, but also this idea of visual activism that you can continue to develop in the book. And I think one of the things that is interesting about visual activism is how it relates to the sort of the violence of racialized labour, and how this connects to this broader question of environmentalism, and particularly the sort of problems with white environmentalism, in that it completely tends to sort of marginalise this question that you ask in the book of who's going to clear up the mess, right? Who's going to clear up the mess? That's not just a question of lifestyle, but a question of pollution, contamination on a vast scale that maintains capitalism. So the generation of waste that is a kind of requirement of racial capitalism.
Okay. Many answers. I mean, first, effectively, the first things in earthworks, it was, it's very visible in New York, right? People running, and in the morning, early morning, even if, it's still night, and then they get their avocado toast, they go to their yoga, whatever. And behind that healthy body, we perform also, we want to sleep at 2 a.m. because, we are financial people, whatever. You have that body that do that possibility. The yoga place will be clean, the avocado, you will have people, cultivate the avocado, all this come and so on. So all this is made possible for this healthy, clean and, performing body. There is a double, that kind of a body. So that's one thing, and for me that was very, very clear. I could not, it has to be said, because there's all these things about, self, cleanliness, take care of your body, meditate, da-di-da-di-da. And then this is possible because a lot of non-white people are producing this possibility for you to be, in good health and so on. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, effectively for me, capitalism produces waste and does not produce commodities. Perhaps it's more important to say it produces waste and it wastes. And the question of wasting has been there from the beginning, with slavery. It was effectively, we know that, life expectancy, if we can call it on plantation, was 8 to 10 years. So, you exhaust, slavery was an exhaustion, a machine of exhausting bodies and land and rivers and everything. And so it still continued to that, producing, for its comfort and its wealth, producing this waste and wasting. So for me, it was not about recycling, your plastic, but effectively about that capacity and dumping the waste in the coral source or in poor non-white neighborhood in the north. And it's not invisible, really. If you're in the hotel and there is a cleaning woman you see her, you're not walking, it's not the invisible woman, you're not in a movie. You see her You see the guard, you see in the museum, you see all these black men, you see them, but you don't see them. So it's a question of what do we see? So again, for instance, for me, sometimes the way visibility and invisibility is being framed is not really right or it's not really reflecting what the question is. It's not invisible, but these people are not invisible. That's not true. They are visible, but they do not matter. And in fact, even their visibility make the visibility of cleanliness better. In a way, you have to see them so they produce that clean work. So it's not a question, it's really a question of exploitation and extraction. So what is invisible is to fabricate innocence towards exploitation and extraction. So you don't see it because it's normal, the way the world is, these people have to clean this, what they wear, So it's the naturalization of that, the naturalization of a visibility that is made, that doesn't matter, but it's not invisible.
Yeah, so one of the things you do in the book, the book is primarily working through concepts and case studies and very kind of concretely grounded in struggle. But you do also talk about a number of artworks, and perhaps we could turn to some of those, because I think that's also really helpful in terms of thinking about what you call visual activism, like the kind of this work of undoing the normalization, the kind of this sort of naturalization of systems of exploitation. So, yeah, Adriana, if you could take us, so perhaps we could start with if you could talk to some of these.
Yeah, that was a performance by Françoise Vergès, she's, based in the Netherlands, Suriname, Netherlands, and she was going to do a performance as an artist. And when the public was waiting for her, she cleaned it. She walked as a cleaning woman, and she was, cleaning. And then the performance started, the public performance. And she was a same woman, but the people had not seen her as the artist, as seen just a cleaning woman. So that was also, and so she told them, but you did not see me. But because she could not be, that effectively a cleaning woman, but she became the artist at the moment when she effectively occupied that identity, function, space, and so on. And I think that was really, I talked with her because for me it was really powerful, really powerful. Again, what you don't want to see. That is, okay, there was a black woman cleaning, what is there to say, right? But then you come to see a black woman doing an artist performance, and there she exists.
And this work also raises for me, in a way, one of the other, there are many important interventions that this book makes, but I think one of the important things that it builds on and critiques in some way is the kind of, obviously, labours of maintenance and care have been focused on by feminists before, right? You're building on their work, and of course, many of us are familiar with social reproduction theory and the way in which that draws attention to forms of labour that are generally not kind of accounted for in the economy because they're either not paid or very poorly paid. And so could you say a little bit about how your work is building on that and kind of moving the discussion along and also making this connection to the kind of broader question of environmental cleaning? And perhaps also, because I think there is some of the ways in which cleaning as an activity has been talked about by feminist theorists and is in terms of drudgery. And I think one of the things that comes out very powerfully in this book is that there could be something that you call decolonial cleaning. So perhaps we could sort of work towards
maybe
that.
We can just pause for a moment and because when you talk about that question of the visible, the invisible, you've already said no, it's not that it's invisible, it's just that we're not seeing things in a certain way, and we can again bring that back to struggles here in the UK of the struggles even here at Goldsmiths to bring the cleaners and the security guards in-house, and just a rewinding a moment to what you were saying, Rose, about a question of that invisible labor that makes possible even the more progressive thinking. So we could be sitting here having a discussion about decolonial ecologies without thinking about what makes this discussion possible, and it's something that has been addressed in recent years, thank goodness. But there's also that question of not just what's visible, but the making the connections and sort of like filling in the dots on a level of scale. And I think that's what was so powerful about the EFLAX article, and that's why we commissioned you to expand that article. And this also links to the question of planetarities as the title of the series, that what you were describing within the cityscape, for instance, or within institutions, within museums, art galleries, that racialized, gendered, invisibilized labor can really be scaled up to a planetary scale. And that's where the segue is between these two books, where you're talking about the museum, then you're talking about the museum without walls, and then it opens up into making the world clean. So maybe we can just pause a little bit as a segue through to that. There's this very beautiful way in Making the World Clean where you talk about the everyday practices of cleaning, or what you call like the trivial or the elemental, and things that are so kind of quotidien that we overlook their significance. And that would then bring us through to that discussion of the kind of feminist critique of the drudgery of cleaning, or Angela Davis, for instance, as incredible as she is, saying, let's liberate women from the space of cleaning. And you're doing something slightly different, so maybe you can just talk us through that move from institutions to the planet, and just tell us a little bit about that question of the trivial and what you're doing with that.
Oh my God, many questions. Okay. I mean, it's rooted also in the historical colonial racial division between clean and unclean, smelly and unsmelly. I mean, the world was divided between what is clean and what is unclean, and the colonial world was unclean. But at the same time, the colonized were assigned to the task of cleaning the white world, bourgeois world. Those who were said to be, dirty and smelly were nonetheless assigned to cleaning the world. So that's a very also interesting. And that colonial racial divide is not just about body, it's about cities, where the garbage is picked up, where it's not, whether you have park and clean, the green things and butterfly and birds, and when you don't. It's everything. It's like effectively very strongly division, very strong division. And so to go to what you say, I mean, it's for me the question of elemental and trivial. It's a structural denial of the basic needs of billions of people because they are poor and non-white. And so the elemental is about the trivial, is about effectively the things that do not matter for the big theorists and so on, which is effectively the daily thing that you have to do to keep the world as it is, to take care of it, And so to go away a little from effectively just the drudgery that is assigned to women, and so we will free ourselves, but what we're going to have like vacuum, electronic vacuum cleaner, I mean, not going to free us so much. And what I say is like, we need cleaning. Babies need to be clean. Elderly need to be clean. Wounded need to be clean. And people pay attention to their environment. You go to people in the poorest place, they will clean the things. I remember growing up, going to places. It was like you have no floor. It was so clean. It was so clean. There was always a little painting, whatever. There was like a concern for this. So then I asked myself, so what will be to take care of and to clean, and they will no longer be drudgery. And so it will be effectively how we will take care of our environment, because we need to take care of our environment, which is right now just constantly poisoned and contaminated. And so cleaning has to be just about, unpoison the world, The environment is totally poisoned, so we spend our time to, take the poison out of, bodies and earth. And so what will be a world that will be not constantly polluted, contaminated, and poisoned? And so, because the cleaning now is just that, and so you have, greenwashing and ecology, which is about, cleaning the mess. But the mess is constantly produced. You have a ton of waste every day being dumped. That, and so, and it's not just. So, how are you going to think about effectively an environment and so let's keep the clean word, the word of cleaning, and take it out of the racial colonial frame that is still, with us today, and how we're going to, effectively take care of people. It's not for nothing that effectively, for instance, Israeli army have left behind them ton of ruins in Gaza. The point is also to make the world uninhabitable and irrespirable for billions of people. Gaza we see it, but the world every day is made uninhabitable and irrespirable for billions of people. And you remember in the book I talk about the fact that reading during COVID, that the main reason for death rate in the world is air pollution. So it's about breathing. So I can breathe in terms of the police violence can be expanded in political and breathing, that is about racial capitalism. So it's really, if you have to look at all this and go back to the elemental and why do you have a structural denial of basic needs for billions of people, that you exclude them and you in fact, make it impossible for them to take care of this elemental.
And I think it's really important, you'll see when you read the book, there's various case studies, but there's a lot of empirical detail about particular cases like Gaza or Israel, the Israeli occupation in general, and the way in which water is really weaponized in terms of access to water and the sort of cutting off of water supply. So again, we're thinking about the way in which conflict and dispossession is carried out on what seems like such a mundane level, but we have to have water. And that question of the elemental, the mundane, the trivial, there's also an element of pleasure within that, or pride, as you've already spoken about. So perhaps that's also, we can use that as a segue through to that question that you pose as to, what would be a different way of thinking about a politics of cleaning that takes into account that divide that you've just spelled out for us, and that moves the discussion somewhere different to that question of social reproduction theory, which you build upon and you acknowledge, and it's incredibly useful, but it takes it somewhere else by thinking about how do we make a politics out of the elemental, how do we make a politics, an anti-racist, decolonial, feminist politics of cleaning, because as you say, the world has to be clean. It's not like we can get over cleaning.
Because the world is unclean.
Exactly, yes.
Racial capitalism fabricate an unclean world.
It has to.
So the world has never been clean since, with slavery and racial capitalism. Has not been clean, has been cleansed.
Exactly.
Genocide and the cleansing.
Yeah.
So we have to take cleaning outside of cleansing.
And you make the distinction between cleaning up, on the one hand, which is this kind of techno-scientific, bureaucratic, procedural cleaning, which actually ends up making things worse. Also definitely not solving the problem, and then a certain politics of cleaning. So maybe you can just talk us through a little bit about that proposition that you give to us, like to ask us to think about this in a different way.
Yeah. But you were talking about water, and water is an elemental.
Yeah.
I mean, without water, there is no cleaning. There is no possibility. So the fact that water has been privatized is contaminated. That in most countries in the world, you cannot drink from the tap, right? You have to buy plastic bottle. So that capture of water is absolutely empty. Is absolutely anti-human, And so, you remember I talk about, these people in township in South Africa, I say, it's time to humanize the world. And so for me, anti-racist, decolonial, feminist politic of cleaning has to do with humanizing the world. it's not about, you know, or changing the room or changing the way of you know, cleaning, you know, in terms of what you do, you know, because in fact, you know, cleaning is not that mysterious, right? You know, so it's not, you know, you have to clean. I mean, all of us know, you know, how to clean. But it's about effectively how that we have not to clean. We cannot clean because we are absolutely buried under waste. And, you know, so already, you know, that politics will be about the abolition of waste, of capitalist waste, the abolition of, you know, this division between dirty and clean, not racial division.
Yeah, exactly.
And having, you know, and between smelly and smelly, and also, so it's I mean, people do it, you know, people have done it, but it's totally in community and so on, they clean, you know, but the part is effectively with as soon as capitalism will have in a place, the place will become dirty and ugly. I mean, there is really politics of ugliness. I mean, like, they don't know how to make the world, you know.
So we'd like to have some time for questions and also for people to join us for a drink and so on. We do have some more slides, but we could maybe have a quick look at. But I think also it would be really interesting to hear you talk a bit about, because maybe it hasn't been absolutely explicit in our conversation so far, that this is also an abolitionist argument. And in the book there's a very beautiful foreword by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and so perhaps we could look at some of the other images that you talk about in the book and kind of move towards kind of, if you could speak to the proposition that book makes as in way an abolitionist argument.
So, okay. Good. Maybe, so this is a work that is...
as I Julian, you know, some of you may know it, the attendant, this guy, you know, who is in the museum, is thinking like guarding, and there was a lot of then fantasy and dreams of, you know, and desire and, you know, sexuality is coming, so disturbing that, you know, figure of the attendant. So it's a, yeah, it's the assignment of black men to that. Okay, I cannot read it, but you can read it. And this is what, during the strike of the cleaners from Ibis Batignolles, an hotel in Paris, and they were, you know, all black women. And they strike for months, and they won finally. And at the beginning, they were not that much, there were no support so much, but then slowly they got some support. It was a very important strike because it was interesting because the client of the hotel could not stand it, so there was a picket line and they were throwing, you know, banana peels or whatever on the picket line because they could not stand the fact that make it visible, the fact that these women were cleaning their room. And then it was also about how people in hotel quite often leave their room even dirtier than they could, you know, because effectively there was a certain message to this woman. And so it was a long battle, and they won. And this is Bobby Yodet, who is a singer, and he wrote this song about, you know, and about, you know, you work hard, you must be paid. That was right. And so
I guess it's also a little bit of a precursor to the Stromae song that people probably are familiar with from during lockdown. Another unacknowledged, slightly precursor. I just put a
okay. So that was, and then we had an afternoon with them, and they sang it. I mean, he sang it, and so we have a moment to get money for them because it was, you know, also to buy toys for the children during for Christmas and things like that. It was a very, and what it was interesting is that the first months at the picket line, you are no feminist. It was for them to realize that it was something to support. I remember, you know, I thought when I went the first time, I thought, oh, there would be a lot of feminism. So, that was also interesting because it was not seen as a feminist struggle at the beginning. You know, it was seen as a worker, social thing. And slowly it became. And it was the question, and today now, effectively, there is much more awareness about it. Effectively, we are in a place, like this place has been cleaned this morning, or going to be cleaned tonight by a woman, and so we can have a gathering. So that there is much more awareness now, but still, we still have to say, remind it.
But maybe this one comes back more to the question you just posed, Rose, about the abolitionist project, and we have this very much throughout the two books, but also your earlier books, where you make reference to Ruth Wilson Gilmore's idea of abolition as life in rehearsal.
Yeah.
And we can think about these many practices, even, the entry into the Louvre and inviting people to tell counter-narratives, or just asking people to look differently, like these small gestures, these workshops. It's also part of rehearsal. But we see very much in the cases like this. I mean, can you just tell us a little bit about why you mentioned this particular piece in terms of abolition and sort of indigenous activism on a global scale?
Yeah, because it was about, dreaming going into space.
Yeah.
And kind of escaping the world for, a billionaire, effectively, and connected with colonization. Let's colonize the space, let's go. And I thought it was very interesting to say, okay, but it's our Earth, this is our planet, and this is where we have to stay and to fight. And so for me, it was very interesting to get away from this reverie, of this, and that there is so much to do here in terms of, and to fight against the ideology of colonization, which is still with us, very strongly with us. And so this abolitionism, which is, and the life, a rehearsal of life, I find this absolutely fundamental, because what Ruth Wilson Gilmore is telling us, and also indigenous people, is that during this moment in which we escape, the frame and, the drudgery or the exhaustion, we rehearse the moment when that will be life again. That is life, and it could be that. But we have a short moment during a strike, during an occupation, during a moment. But this we learn, it's an accumulation of knowledge toward that moment when effectively, there will be abolition. So this, for me, are very important, effectively. And so it's not just about counter-narrative, it's a practice.
But also building on previous practices,
building
on indigenous struggles.
Yeah, but it's really your body, through the body. It's not just, about speaking, and it's also through, dancing together, shouting, putting also your body in action, that this rehearsal also is happening. It's not just about speaking or making a painting. It's about that moment where we are together and we do something together. That's a rehearsal of life.
So I'm aware that there will probably be questions. Yeah, I think so, yes. But just to say, if you haven't seen this film, it's a really fantastic work that imagines that all the white people have left planet Earth and indigenous people are left to clear up. But in the absence of white people, they're also able to start healing from the hundreds of years of colonization. So it's a film that has a lot of humor and heart, and really resonates with the book. So I'm sure.
Before we do the question, I'm just, talk about the feminist.
Oh yes.
Very quickly, because you.
Also, just to bring it back to the museum practice, I mean, as I mentioned before, there is the eternal question of what do we do in these public spaces, be it here in London or in Paris? So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about this program.
Very quickly, when I say the decolonization of the Western Museum is impossible, because it's a colonial institution, and it's there. Okay, British Museum, they are there. They have to, to carry the burden of themselves. Okay? Yeah, whatever. Okay. What we have to do after, for decades, saying question of representation, diversity, now we open the curating for them for 10, 15 years. They're going to do it without us. Let them do it. But we have to think about what I call the post-museum, because the museum is also a word that a lot of community use to say something about transmission, preservation, like not being erased, not being. And so the question is the post-museums, the Bannister Fellowship, they have, if you have to bring London and Paris together, so two imperial city, capital of finance, political capital, cultural capital, and museum that absolutely weigh on us, the British National Gallery. So in this space, how can we imagine, abolitionist space, effectively about, today? So how do we tell the story of refugee, migrant today, or what is, about what is being destroyed very fast, because there is a velocity today. I mean, everything has been destroyed forever, but now there is a velocity to it that we have to confront, So this will be, and so on the 30th of April, we will have, there will be a workshop, and then we will open, and so you're all invited. What I want to work is on a concrete solution, not just, because I quite often we love to talk. And, it starts by what we're going to put on the wall, and for me it starts by the space. How do we enter that space? Different bodies, elderly, babies, non-valid, all this. What is the space in which we enter? So it's the space before anything. And then we will see, perhaps there will be nothing in it, but so this question of rethinking, because space are made like that, and we enter in this space naturally. But so we have to rethink effectively. And there are a lot of examples, but then we have to think, what would be the principle, the basic principle of a post-museum, then that could be adapted, in different places. So, perhaps just a roof, I don't know, perhaps a mobile things, perhaps, an ephemeral space, and then it disappear, whatever, but we have to think about it. So that will be that. So the work in London will be on the 30th of May, and Shela has made this QR code that will be
connect you to the... There's no information online yet, but there will be. You can sign up for a newsletter.
And that you will...
So everyone's invited.
You will find it, you will be invited, and then we hope we will have some carnival and something fun.
Great. Okay, so we've probably got time for 2 questions. See some eager hands going up, and if you can try and keep your questions fairly short, that would be really great. So,
should we group the questions?
Okay, yeah, we'll group the questions. So we've got 2 on the front row here. We have a roaming mic. So please, if you can wait till the mic comes, because we're recording this, so it's really great if you can use the mic. So there's one question here, and then the next question there.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to read because I want to be quick. I was so inspired by this talk and what you said about, you mentioned the people are not invisible, they are visible, but they don't matter to the visible. And as a Dalit artist myself, who is trying to articulate caste blindness in decolonizing theories in my own research, I'm so grateful for your reference. You referenced in your book to Dalit artist exhibition, Archiving Labor in Chennai, an acknowledgement of caste in your chapter, Who Cleans the World. My question to you here is that what advice do you have for the researchers who are unearthing and excavating such layered yet unacknowledged oppressive aspects in art research field where most of our word limit and energy and time is spent in communicating what caste is and why it is necessary to reference it in relation with decolonizing methodologies and research. Further, I want to ask how to engage with the question of research gap when all I can feel is not a limited gap in the context but a void of an empty ocean. So my question is how to move past and how to survive such an overwhelming amount of absence and erasure. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you
for the talk. It's me here. Hi. My question is quite quick. When you were talking about the clean and the unclean, the smelly and the perfumed, let's say, I couldn't help thinking about class and the term class, and perhaps it might have been a bit implicit for you, but I wonder if it's important to still mention it, and as it might kind of provide maybe a wider net, a wider framework for understanding certain types of oppression that can involve also white people, and maybe have been going on for, centuries, maybe even before the slave trade began. I was wondering what your stance is on this intersectional approach. Thank you.
We have one more question? Yeah, we've got time for one more question. Yeah.
I think my question is maybe I'm asking for clarification here. I wonder why, when you talk about the politics of cleaning, you keep the word clean, right?
Could you talk up a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit hard to hear you.
I wonder why in this politics of cleaning there is where the value of the word clean is, because seemingly when you talk about this everyday cleaning, there is it's kind of a removal, or it's cleaning in a very literal sense. But when you talk about planetary cleaning, it's a sort of like unwaste, if that makes sense. Like it's making sure that we make less waste. And I don't know if maybe I didn't understand this quite correctly, but on a first approach, like those seem very opposite things. And so I would like to know where the link is specifically, like where the word cleaning comes into producing less waste, if that makes sense.
Thanks everyone for those questions. So Françoise will address all of those. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start. Of course, class, and anyway, there have been processes of racialization also in Europe before the slave trade with the Jews and Rome, and who is clean and unclean. So there is something very deep in Western thinking, Western colonial thinking, and colonial for me is really also started in Europe. But nonetheless, what happened with the slave trade was nonetheless really incredible. The slave ship was known, for people, and then you find this is Marcus Rediker and other, that people knew on the shore that a slave ship was arriving because of the smell. Because effectively rotten flesh. There was something really. And of course, you're right into the class, and also, as you do know, women, sex workers, all this. The point of the constant question they're raising smell, having, and all the things that we have to put in the house so it smells good, And so, there is an industry around that of erasing smell, that has to do with that deep notion of what is a clean environment. What is and smelly. There is a lot of literature about that. I quote some in the book because I did not want also to, because they are very violent. They're really violent. And today, effectively, it's expanded, as I say, everywhere, because also the construction of the world into enclave. The enclave for the rich world, making secession, and then the rest of it. But for a long time, the colonial racial movement was really something that, nonetheless, while Europe was getting better, it was also on the exploitation and exhaustion of land. I mean, the land in the colony is very, very, I mean, in the global, what we call the global south, has been deeply damaged by colonization, water, river, and everything. And of course, rivers were polluted during the Industrial Revolution, but then they could be cleaned after that, you know. So there was this, you know, nonetheless division. But effectively, class is very important. But class, I mean, you know, race is, you know, classes also live through race. The political thing, I mean, and then I will come back to the question, you know, of my past. To be sure I've understood your question. What you mean is like, what will be cleaning that will not make waste? No, that's not that.
I think what I mean is, like, as you said, the way to make the planet clean is not to collect all the garbage, is to make less of it.
Yeah.
And so the logic of that to me seems like it's a very different logic than that of everyday cleaning.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm asking whether we're cleaning in that. What is the role of the word cleaning?
Okay.
So
Why do we
keep the word?
Why do
clean? What is it?
Okay, because one, I don't have a lot of imagination. No, really, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, it's like with music, I say, oh God, could I have like something, could I invent a word, you know, and then it will be very important and people, it will be everywhere, but I'm not that very good. So cleaning the same thing, I was thinking, like, what can I do? And it's worse in French, because in French the word is even worse. So it's like, but I can't, I mean, I'm very bad. So the point is, I try in the book to explain what I mean by that, you know, so I'm sorry, you know. But I understand, effectively, and I say in the book that cleaning is a very difficult term, you know, because effectively you have also cleansing, you know, and cleaning the place, which has to do with genocide and ethnic cleansing and so on, and, you know, and of course, and getting rid. So it's a very effectively dangerous word, and so I talk about it, and I agree with you. If you have an idea, tell me. But you know, my point was like, in terms of taking care, but not in the caring necessarily, but to live in a world that will be that everyone could inhabit and everyone could breathe, and this is not what's happening. And the denial of this elemental, you know, is it's absolutely, effectively, mostly, majority, even if you do have class, majority people in the global south. It's incredible, especially. So, but effectively it's not turning up. That's, you know, part of the capitalism, and it's a business, as you know, it's an industry. And it is not resolved because, in fact, there are more and more and more wasting being done. And I talk about the dumping, you know, in the global south, but also in the north. What is to dump, and you know, where do you dump, and how do you, you know, and that politic of dumping has to do effectively with class and race, very deeply. And but also to be careful. I mean, very quickly, you know, also that not how can I say that of course cleaning is drudgery. But the people who clean are very often very proud of their work. So we have to be careful also, you know. Also, not because when I was, you know, with the cleaners of all time, they are very proud of what they are doing. And they think that, you know, this is part of, you know, content for them not to get paid as they should be paid and to be clean. So we have also to be careful, you know, with that. It's not drudgery, but it's drudgery because it's unpaid, and why they are not paid, as well as an engineer or whatever, you know, in an hospital, for instance, as a surgeon. So, but they take pride also in what they do, and so we shouldn't forget that. Okay, the amount of absence and erasure, yes and no. We have much more than we think. We have a lot. We have a lot. We have much more. We have so many songs, poems, I mean, so many things. We do have a lot. In fact, more than we think. And we have not even started to really look at it. and to excavate it. So we have to pay attention to look around us, and there's a lot of things. I mean, and every day in the world, people are creating beauty against, the political ugliness and wasting. So I would say, and the last thing I will say, they may be fragmentary, but that has been the word of the oppressed. We don't need genealogy from the 11th century to us. It's okay to have just fragment. Fragment is also the life. It's a part of life, And we work with fragment, and we do things out of fragment. And so we should not look for completeness, fullness. That's patriarchy, and that heritage, legacy from the, and then, as Marx says, wait on us, like the dead. So we have to, to get rid of. So we have to free ourselves sometimes. Look at how museum and the world, the World Wide World, is full of things. Full. There is no space to breathe. We have to make space for breathing also. We will be the one, to do that. To make space. It's gonna be like you cannot breathe in their world. So we have also to make, because to open for the future, to open for the present, you have to make space.
Thank you, Françoise. I think that's a beautiful moment to finish. Please keep around and have a drink with us and have conversation and buy a copy of Françoise's book if you so please. And thanks for being here.